so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So once again, thank you all so much for coming. My name is Katie Cantrell, and I am the Executive Director of the Factory Farming Awareness Coalition. So I'm going to be talking to you today about the variety of different issues that are impacted by factory farming. And it seems like people here already really care about a lot of these different issues, so that's awesome that we're on the same page. Hopefully it won't be too much repeat knowledge, but I found that there's so many different facets to this issue that I learn new stuff all the time. I've been doing this work for about 4 years now, and I'm continuously surprised. So hopefully everyone will be able to learn something today. Oh. Okay. All right. Okay. So here's an outline of what I'll be talking to you about today, and I'm just to frame our presentation using the Real Food Wheel. This is from the Real Food Challenge, and they divide the food system up into 4 different sectors. So this is the 4 sectors involved in producing food, and also the 4 sectors impacted by food. They group animals as part of the earth. I think they're more producers, but the 4 components are producers, the earth, consumers, and communities. So I'll be talking about how all of these different sectors are impacted by factory farming. So here's an outline. First I want to talk about what factory farming is, how it got started, and then I'll talk about those 4 segments of our food system. All right, so how many of you sang Old MacDonald when you were kids? Show of hands. Pretty much everybody, right? So when we walk into a grocery store, we look around at the pictures on products. It looks like Old MacDonald's farming methods are still being used today. There's all of those rolling green hills, all those happy cows, but as I'm sure most of you already know, that's not what farming is actually like anymore in this country. Yes. So rather than Old MacDonald, this is what we have today. 99% of all animal products in the United States come from factory farms. So what is factory farming exactly? It's technically known as concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. It's the practice of confining thousands of animals into a single barn to produce the most product for the lowest cost. So here we see egg, beef, pork, and chicken factory farms. The basis for factory farming actually began in the 1920s with the invention of vitamin supplements. This allowed animals to be raised indoors with supplements like vitamin D rather than outside, as humans had always done. Since then, different types of technological developments have allowed for the growth of factory farming. So light and air filtration systems ensure that animals never need to see the light of day or breathe fresh air, and antibiotics ensure that no matter how unsanitary the conditions, the animals won't die off in large numbers. Family farmers have largely become a thing of the past thanks to factory farms. Just 4 companies currently control a majority of cow, pig, and chicken production. As a result, over 500,000 hog farmers have gone out of business in the past 25 years. And 2 companies have patents on all of the genes for all chickens raised for meat in the entire world. So as we can see, this entire segment of our food system is controlled by just a handful of corporations. So there is supposedly one big advantage to this system, and that's cheap food. In the last 50 years, the average cost of a new house has increased nearly 1,500%, while eggs and chicken meat haven't even doubled in that time frame. So if you talk to someone who works in agribusiness, they'll tell you that they're helping the world by producing cheap food for people to eat. And a lot of them do genuinely believe it. They do think that they're doing something good for the world. But as we'll see, this cheap food actually comes at a very steep cost. So for those of you who don't already know, does anyone want to take a guess as to how many animals are killed for food every year in the United States? Anyone want to throw out a number?
10 billion.
10 billion, okay. 10 billion. I think you already know. Yeah, you guys already know. All right. So actually, thankfully, in the last year, the number has decreased. So now it's somewhere between 9 and 10 billion animals. You guys are a very educated audience. Usually when I ask people to guess, they'll guess like 50 million. People have no idea of the scale of animal agriculture that goes on in this country. So there's about 9 billion animals killed for food every year in the United States, about 60 billion worldwide. And as we can see, the vast majority of those 9 billion animals are raised on factory farms. The reason that we're raising and killing so many animals every year is that Americans eat more animal products than any society ever has before. So the average American eats 265 pounds of meat every single year. Okay, so that was just background to inform our understanding of what factory farming is and its different impacts. So Now I'll go into producers, and I think the primary producers where animal products are concerned are the animals themselves. So I'm going to give you just a very short overview because I'm sure most of you already know about this. If you aren't well informed on this issue, I'll be happy to talk to you. We have a table, Vegan Outreach is here, Mercy for Animals is here. There's a lot of different groups that have a lot of literature on this topic. Usually when we speak in schools and to general audiences, I go into much more depth. About a third of our presentation, I talk about the conditions for animals, and I'm mostly preaching to the choir, so I don't want to bore you guys and depress you with things that you already know. So, of course, the hallmark of factory farming is intensive confinement. It's in the name, concentrated animal feeding operations. So, these animals spend their entire lives indoors, crammed in there with thousands of other animals in spaces so small that they often cannot turn around. And they live out their entire lives like this. So the first time that these animals see sunlight is when they're shipped to slaughter. So here we see these are mother pigs that spend the 16 weeks of their pregnancy in these gestation crates. These are the crates where female dairy calves are kept after they're separated from their mothers. They're taken away just a day or two after being born, and until they're big enough to be artificially inseminated, they're kept in these crates that you see here. And you can see these driving through Petaluma. You can see this for yourself. These are egg-laying chickens in battery cages, and baby turkeys on a turkey factory farm. So, as we might imagine, this incredibly unnatural confinement drives these animals insane. They get so stressed out, and they often take out their stress physically. They get really aggressive, and so they attack the other animals. And so, to prevent them from killing each other, the workers physically mutilate them and cut off the sharp parts of their bodies. So on the top there we see chickens and turkeys have their beaks and the sharp parts of their toes cut off. Dairy cows have their horns cut off. And piglets have their tails, sharp parts of their teeth, and testicles cut off. And all of these procedures are done without any sort of pain relief. So the main question that I get when giving this presentation to people who are less informed about this issue is, that can't be legal, that cruelty to animals is illegal. Why doesn't the government do something about it? But the first thing to know is that there are no federal animal cruelty laws. That's all regulated at the state level. And almost every state has what's called common farming practice exemptions. So what this means is that the factory farms themselves get to define what's considered cruel. So cutting off a puppy's tail without anesthetic, felony animal cruelty. Cutting off a piglet's tail without anesthetic is perfectly legal because it's a common practice on factory farms. Okay, so that was just a very quick overview of conditions for animals on factory farms. So now I'm going to talk about the other producers involved in animal agriculture, and that's the workers. So I'm going to start by describing the life story of a standard slaughterhouse worker. So Luis was a corn farmer in Mexico. When the United States flooded Mexico with cheap corn, thanks to free trade agreements like NAFTA, he couldn't earn a living from farming anymore. One day he heard an ad on the radio promising him a better life in the United States, good wages, housing, a chance at the American dream. So he boards a free bus that Tyson has chartered to drive him from Mexico to Nebraska to work at a slaughterhouse. Once Luis reaches the United States, however, he realizes that he has been cruelly misled. He faces one of the most dangerous jobs in the country. So since the 1970s, his job has become highly specialized, which means that these workers are doing the same one motion thousands of times every single day, which results in extremely high rates of what they call cumulative trauma injuries. These are 33 times higher on slaughterhouses than in other factories. And cumulative trauma injuries are particularly devastating because they often cause these workers pain for the rest of their lives. They're often crippled after working on slaughterhouses for just a year or two. On top of this, they don't have any health insurance despite these incredibly dangerous working conditions. And these companies purposely recruit undocumented workers because they know that they will not be able to speak out against these abuses. They won't be able to try to organize, try to unionize, or complain to the government because if they do, they'll just be threatened with deportation. And these companies actually do bring in immigration naturalization services every few years to kick these people out so that they bring in new workers who can't form bonds, who can't commiserate about how bad these conditions are. And on top of that, as we can imagine, this is an extremely traumatic job. And a lot of these workers indeed do develop post-traumatic stress disorder from facing so much suffering and death on a daily basis. And of course, they don't have access to basic health care, let alone mental health care. So a lot of them have to turn to alcohol or to drugs to try to numb that pain. And actually, believe it or not, there's a job that some of us might consider even worse than the regular slaughterhouse workers, and that's the job of the late night cleaning crew. So these people come in at midnight, and by sunrise, they have to clean the remains of the 3,000 to 4,000 cattle that have been slaughtered at the plant that day. So again, the vast majority of these employees are undocumented immigrants. They're actually considered independent contractors. They're not even a single profession, so they're definitely not unionized. Their wages are even lower than those of regular slaughterhouse workers, and they don't keep statistics on their injury or death rates. But we can imagine just how dangerous this job is. They have to clean while all of the conveyor belts and slaughtering mechanisms are running to get all the blood and gore out from in between them. So just to give you a single example, at a national beef plant in Kansas, a man climbed into a blood collection tank 30 feet high, but he was overcome by the hydrogen sulfide fumes and actually fell into the tank. Another man climbed into the tank to try to rescue him, but both men drowned. 8 years earlier, another worker had died in that very same tank, and 2 other men had died trying to save him. So for this, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration fined National Beef for its negligence, but the fine was $480 for each man's death. It's not even a slap on the wrist. So clearly even the government regards these workers as completely expendable. And I think this is something that's really important for us to keep in mind, because I've noticed a lot of animal activists will sometimes demonize the workers who are working on slaughterhouses, but I mean, it's important to realize this is just as much of a social justice issue as it is an animal rights issue. These workers are every bit as much victims of the system as the animals are. So we've reached our first cuteness interlude. I know this is a lot of really heavy information, so I want to remind you there is goodness in the world. So this is time to take a breath, just kind of process everything.
It helps to balance out the heavy stuff with the light stuff, so you made a smart move.
Exactly, thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears again and talk about another segment of our food system, which is the earth. So I'm going to talk about our most basic natural resources, land, water, and air. So, as many of you probably know, animal products are extremely inefficient. It requires many more resources to go into them than the caloric value that we get out of them. So this little infographic shows the resources that it takes to acquire a single hamburger patty. So a single hamburger patty takes 6.7 pounds of grain to produce. That's one, less than a quarter pound of beef takes over 6 pounds of grains. And those grains are corn and soy. So as we can see, in 2000, there were 72 million acres of corn and 72 million acres of soy harvested, and only 2 million acres of all other vegetables combined. Does anyone want to guess what percentage of the soy is fed to animals? 90, I heard? It's a good guess. 98% of all of the soy that's grown in the United States is fed to animals on factory farms, as is 44% of the corn crop. Animals are the single largest consumer of corn as well. So in a nutshell, this is why Big Macs are cheaper than salads. The government is subsidizing corn and soy to feed to animals, and then they're subsidizing those final animal products as well. Whereas fruits and vegetables are deemed specialty crops, and they receive less than 1% of all federal subsidies. So this is why many Americans can't afford or can't even access the healthy fruits and vegetables that very same government is telling them that they need to eat in order to be healthy. This system, which is called monoculture, just growing one crop, is also extremely bad land management practice. So when farmers in the Midwest abandon crop rotations, growing a variety of fruits and vegetables depending on the season and depending on the nutrient levels in the soil, to grow just corn, the average soil erosion rose from 2.7 tons per acre to 19.7 tons annually. So one of our most valuable resources, we need soil to grow the food that we survive on, is literally blowing away because we're not managing the land properly. Also, the vast majority of the corn and soy that are fed to animals are genetically modified. So we have this really vicious, I might even go so far as to call it evil cycle, of genetically modified seeds. So the vast majority of seeds that are sold in the world now are produced by just 6 biotech companies. They own the basis for all food, basically. And so they sell farmers these seeds, and these seeds have been genetically modified to be dependent on chemicals, pesticides, that are sold by those same biotech companies. So these pesticides are extremely dangerous for the workers on the farms, for animals, the surrounding ecosystem, and consumers as well. And then those GMO and pesticide-laden crops are fed to animals on factory farms. So animals on factory farms are the largest consumers of GMOs in this country. So we have this cycle, and you really can't have any one of these elements without the other two. So there's a lot of talk about GMOs. I know a lot of people here are concerned about GMOs, but one thing that I don't hear talked about very much is that if we stop eating animal products, we can, that's taking out the largest source of revenue for these GMO companies. Likewise, you couldn't have the GMO seeds without the pesticides that go with them, so really all of the links in this chain are inextricably linked. Okay, so I talked about the feed. I'll get to water in a minute, but as we might imagine, 6.7 pounds of grains for a single hamburger patty, to grow all of those crops takes a lot of land. So we see it takes 74.5 square feet for grazing land and land to grow all of those grains that are fed to the animals. As a result, animal agriculture is one of the leading causes of deforestation worldwide. So animal agriculture currently accounts for 30% of the use of the Earth's entire land surface. So it's a leading cause of deforestation and habitat destruction as well. When we cut down these forests, we're cutting down the homes of all of these wild animals. So it's also a leading cause of species being listed as endangered. Okay, so now I'm going to move on and talk about water. So as we might imagine, growing all of those crops also requires a lot of water. And in addition, there's water required for the animals as well. So this infographic shows the amount of water that it takes to produce a single pound of the product that we buy at the supermarket. I think we all know that beef is not great for the environment. It doesn't come as a huge surprise that beef is the largest consumer of water. So it takes almost 2,500 gallons of water to produce a single pound of beef. But what does surprise a lot of people is that it takes over 2,000 gallons of water to produce a pound of butter. And we see, all of the most water-intensive products are these animal products. And in comparison to those, 2,000 gallons of water, it takes 54 gallons of water to produce a pound of broccoli, 21 gallons of water to produce a pound of cabbage. And this issue is going to become more and more important as we face global water shortages. So a lot of political scientists think that within 50 years we'll be seeing not wars over oil, but wars over water, as communities are facing lack of clean, fresh water. And to add insult to injury, these factory farms are polluting the remaining water. So the largest source of pollution is manure, is poop. Farm animals in the US produce 130 times as much waste as the entire US human population. So imagine if every man, woman, and child just peed and pooped into giant pits all year round, and that's what you have on factory farms. So each of these little white rectangles that you see here is a pig factory farm with almost 9,000 pigs in it. And there are 9 of those buildings. So all of their poop is pumped out into that 20 million gallon manure lagoon that you see there. That's the official industry term, by the way, is manure lagoon. So what happens to that 20 million gallons of manure is that it's dried out a little bit and put onto another lagoon that you see here until it's, some of the moisture has evaporated, and then it's sprayed out onto surrounding land, where it leaches into the water table and runs off into local streams and rivers. And in addition, if there's too much of it to be contained, often the factory farms will illegally dump it, just dump it straight into rivers, because it's cheaper for them to do that than to pay to have it treated properly. So as a result, factory farm runoff is one of the leading causes of water pollution in the US. It's polluted over 35,000 miles of river in 22 states. So this picture that we see here is a confirmed case of illegal factory farm discharge. The brown that we see in the middle is manure, and the white surrounding it is an algae bloom. So manure has really high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus, which the algae love, so they grow like crazy, which takes all of the oxygen out of the water and kills off all of the fish. So factory farm runoff has killed 13 million fish in just 3 years, which completely wrecks the local ecosystems. So now I'm going to talk about air. In addition to all this water pollution, factory farming also causes immense air pollution. So several years ago, the EPA actually struck a deal with factory farms that if they allowed the EPA to monitor air pollution at a handful of factory farms, all factory farms would be exempt from past and future violations of the Clean Air Act, which is a pretty sweet deal, if you ask me. And they struck this deal despite the fact that many studies have shown that factory farms emit hydrogen sulfide and ammonia levels 10 times higher than are legally allowed for other industries, including the oil industry. And both of these are toxic gases that really wreak havoc with the health of local communities. In addition to those gases, factory farms also emit greenhouse gases. So animal agriculture is one of the leading sources of man-made methane and nitrous oxide. And mostly when we hear about climate change greenhouse gases, we hear about CO2. But actually methane is 20 times more potent than CO2 at warming the atmosphere, and nitrous oxide is 300 times more potent as a greenhouse gas. So because of these immense greenhouse gas emissions, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization found that animal agriculture causes 40% more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector combined. So that's more than all of the planes, trains, and automobiles all added up together. And indeed, we see that the carbon footprint for a gallon of milk is almost equal to the carbon footprint for a gallon of gasoline. Now, in addition to this direct emission of greenhouse gases, factory farming also consumes an immense amount of fossil fuels. So does anyone want to guess how far meat travels on average from farm to plate? How many miles? Come on, someone's got to guess.
700 miles.
700 miles? Okay. Okay. That's a good, decent guess. About 1,500 miles on average from farm to plate. So for instance, there's a factory farm in there's a slaughterhouse in Southern California that slaughters pigs that have been shipped all the way from Nebraska. So when you take the greenhouse gases and the fossil fuel use into consideration, a study from the University of Chicago found that consuming no animal products is 50% more effective at fighting global warming than switching from a standard car to a hybrid. So theoretically, anyway, a vegan driving a Hummer is doing more to stop climate change than an omnivore driving a Prius. Sure. And another fact, which Hope, for those of you who saw her talk, talked about a lot, but not eating meat just one day a week saves more greenhouse gas emissions than buying local food 100% of the time. Of course, there's no reason we can't do both. I'm not saying we shouldn't buy local, but it's much more effective to stop eating animal products. So, another cuteness interlude. Okay, are there any questions so far about the environmental impacts? No? Okay, so I'll move on and talk about the impacts on communities. All right, so factory farms, as you might imagine, are devastating for the people who live close to them. We can take a minute to imagine what it would be like. I mean, you can't open your windows because of the stench and the squealing. There's fly clouds in the summer, there's manure runoff in the winter, and you and your family suffer from a host of devastating health problems. Diarrhea, migraines, depression, asthma. And the people who face these health problems are the people who can afford it the least, because factory farms are almost always located near low-income communities of color. So this is an environmental racism issue as well. And in addition to all of the health problems that result from breathing in those gases and that fecal matter, many of these workers actually have antibiotic-resistant bacteria that have colonized their bodies. What happens is animals on factory farms are fed 10 times the amount of antibiotics that humans are. And so antibiotic-resistant bacteria result. So these antibiotics go into the animal systems, come out in their manure, which farm workers and surrounding communities come into direct contact with. So one study found that 40% of workers tested on a pig factory farm had what's called MRSA. It's antibiotic-resistant staph infection. They had these sores on their arms and their legs that didn't respond to antibiotics. And many of their families had also acquired MRSA as well. And then on top of this, when factory farms move into a town, it causes a lot of economic devastation. So although Smithfield and all these big corporations will say that they're job creators, they're helping local economies, studies have found that for every job that's created by a factory farm, 2 local farmers lose their job. And we might wonder, well, these families who live near factory farms, it's awful, why don't they just move? And they can't afford to move, because as soon as the factory farm comes to town, their property value plummets. No one wants to buy that house. And so total, factory farms have cost $26 billion in lost property values around the country. So these families are stuck. They can't afford to move anywhere because they can't sell their houses. Okay, one more cuteness interlude. This is one of my favorites. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about the last section, which is consumers. And again, there's a lot of really wonderful people talking about health issues related to animal products, plant-based diets. So I'm just going to go through a really brief overview, but there's a lot of fantastic resources about this here today if you want more information. So the biggest short-term concern for consumers is food poisoning. 76 million people are sickened from food poisoning every year, and 5,000 people die from it. One study found that 90% of meat bought in the supermarket contained potentially dangerous bacteria. And actually, just recently, a study by the Environmental Working Group found that up to 81% of turkey products, and the majority of other types of meat tested as well, contain not just bacteria, but antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So this is now, it's not just in communities surrounding factory farms, it's at almost all of the meat that's at the supermarket. In addition to that short-term health danger, it also causes extremely dangerous long-term health effects. Most of the leading causes of death, how many of you have seen Dr. Greger speak? Did you guys see him speak yesterday? Yeah, he's my favorite. So he has a really fantastic talk called Uprooting the Leading Causes of Death, where he goes through the top 15 causes of death and talks about how I think like 13 of them can be prevented or treated through plant-based diets. So cancer, for example, vegans are 40% less likely to get cancer than meat eaters, 32% less likely to die from heart disease, and 30% less likely to get diabetes. So basically, not consuming these animal products can help prevent some of the most deadly problems facing our society today. And in addition to our own personal health, overall, this is also a social justice issue because families, people pay tens of thousands of dollars every year in medical bills for issues that could have been prevented or can be treated through extremely simple, cheap plant-based diets. But conveniently, doctors aren't talking about this, the mainstream media isn't talking about it. And the reason for that is that diabetes alone is a $176 billion a year industry. So, these pharmaceutical companies and the doctors that they're paying to sell their products would much rather that we pay for those drugs than pay for broccoli and beans and all those nice, cheap plant-based foods. All right. Another cuteness interlude. Okay. It's a donkey and a little pig. Yeah. Okay. So the bottom line of this presentation is that every purchase in a supermarket and every order from a menu is powerfully and inevitably linked with agricultural policy. So every time that we make a decision about food, we're farming by proxy. So the good news is that we have a choice. We really have unique power over this industry because we participate in it or choose not to participate in it 3 times a day. That's huge. I mean, there's no equivalent. There's nothing like that. We don't exert nearly as much consumer power over any other industry. And so, as I'm sure most of you know, the most effective change that you can make is to boycott these products. So the most effective boycott, the most thorough boycott is to go vegan. But you don't have to be 100% vegan. You don't have to label yourself vegan in order to put soy milk in your cereal. You don't have to self-identify as vegetarian to order a veggie burger at a restaurant. I think a lot of people get hung up on those labels and don't want the stigma attached to it, or oh, I can't be 100% pure, so I just can't do it. But it's really not about labeling yourself this way or that. It's about looking at where these products are coming from, looking at the practices behind them and the repercussions of them, and deciding, is that really something that we want to support? Do we feel comfortable giving our money to these companies? By buying these products, we're endorsing all of these practices as well. So, as I'm sure most of you have discovered here today, it's never been easier or tastier to boycott animal products. There's a wide range of vendors here, lots of amazing restaurants in the Bay Area, so I'm sure you're all well familiar with this fact. And a common question that comes up is people say, well, sure, but I'm just one person, so what difference are my choices really going to make with this huge global issue? And the good news is that our choices make a huge difference. So in the past 5 years, animal product consumption has been steadily declining for the first time in over 50 years. So really, our small choices add up and they have tremendous power. And companies are starting to notice, restaurants are starting to notice, and it creates this positive trend where they say, oh, hey, a lot more people are asking for veg options, so we'll start selling almond milk in the main dairy case. We'll start offering a veggie burger on our menu. And so this way, people who don't have access to this knowledge, who don't have access to health food stores, do have access to, almond milk at Safeway. So it really, the more that the more educated consumers exercise our power, the more that we can bring access to these foods to other people. So I just want to leave you with a single quote from Jonathan Safran Foer's really fantastic book, Eating Animals. Just how destructive does a culinary preference have to be before we decide to eat something else? If contributing to the suffering of billions of animals that live miserable lives and quite often die in horrific ways isn't motivating, what would be? If being the #1 contributor to the most serious threat facing the planet, climate change, isn't enough, what is? And if you're tempted to put off these questions of conscience, to say not now, then when. So remember that every time you decide not to eat an animal product, you're taking action against one of the most destructive industries on the planet. Okay. And since, sorry, one second. Also, since I know many of you are not just consumers, but are also activists, I wanted to give you a few more steps to take. Sorry, one second. Okay. All right. Here we go. Okay. So if you're not satisfied with just eating a vegan diet, buying almond milk at the grocery store, things like that, but you want to take the next step, my organization, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about it. So we are local. We're based in the East Bay, and we are really all about empowering people with knowledge, because these corporations go to very great lengths to keep people from knowing where their food is coming from. And starting out, I was optimistic, and I've been proven right. The people, as soon as they learn about this, they really do care. It's just about finding a way to get them this information in a venue where they'll be open to receiving it. And then once they learn about this, I've never had a single person who's been like, I don't see what the problem is. This seems fine to me. Everyone is horrified, Yeah. Everyone wants to make a difference. And so what we do, we go to schools, community organizations, churches, businesses, really any group of 5 people or more who will have us and talk to them about this issue. And again, because we're addressing so many different facets of it, we're able to reach a lot of audiences who, if we were an animal rights group, this wouldn't be relevant to them and they would never invite us to speak. But we can speak about the environmental issues, government, economics, public health. There's so many different ways that this information is relevant. So one of the best things that you can do to help out is if you are connected to any groups, any classes that might be interested in hosting our presentation, the number one way that we get into venues is through personal referrals. They're much more likely to invite us to come speak if one of their members says, oh, hey, I saw this great presentation that I think people might be interested in. So I'm going to go ahead and pass around our email sign-up sheet. So if you know of any venues, you can either come talk to me afterwards. We have a table in the auditorium as well, or you can just write it on the questions and comments section right here. So I'll go ahead and start passing that around. And also, related to that, under the questions and comments, this is for our general email list, which is just like once a month updates about big things we're up to and exciting new things. But also, since we're local, we have lots of volunteers and we could use a lot more volunteers. So if you're interested in volunteering with us, we do a lot of different things, from fun little things, we have monthly vegan potlucks, to we also give professional speaker training for people who want to learn how to give this presentation, learn how to talk about these issues more effectively. So the next one is coming up on October 12th. We have a professional communications consultant who will be leading that training. So if you're interested in that, you can also write it on the questions and comments section. All right, so, oops. Okay, there we go. All right, so that is the end of the presentation. And now I'm happy to take questions or comments. Okay, anyone's thoughts? Yes?
Just wondering, do you have the numbers about how much water it takes for somebody who's on a vegan diet versus somebody who's on a meat diet, like a given week or year, any type of time frame?
I don't know that offhand, but I know it's definitely out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah, you do? Okay.
Like one of your little tips like that is something like you can take showers 24 hours a day and be fine with that and use less water than you would need. Yeah, maybe very consumer.
Yeah.
Which my teenage daughter does the freedom of shower.
Yes.
Do you ever address the honeybee collapse syndrome, that's going on?
We haven't really addressed that so much because we mainly focus on animal agriculture, and there's a lot of evidence that that's a pesticide that's used. Well, it is related because it's used a lot on corn and soy, which are fed to animals on factory farms. We're actually partnered with the Pesticide Action Network, and they do a lot of work around that issue. So we share and promote the petition that they've been distributing. But that's a very serious threat for all forms of agriculture and all of our food that's related to those big 6 GMO and pesticide companies that I mentioned. Yes.
The case that you make is so compelling that I wonder why, just in general, there isn't further adoption of like this type of practice, this type of living, just because it seems like a no-brainer. So.
I certainly agree with you. I think a lot of us probably have experience, and there's a wide array of reasons that people are hesitant. They think it's extreme, or they feel like they can't adopt a vegan diet. Oh, I can never give up meat, I can never give up cheese, things like that. But I really think, especially if you look at the numbers, more and more people well, I mean, the number of vegans has more than doubled in the last few years, but even aside from that, just the number of people who don't identify as vegetarian or vegan, who are participating in Meatless Mondays, who are cutting back, is really skyrocketing. So I think that, I mean, it might be hard to see on a daily basis, but the change in people's diets is happening really fast. And I think it's because people are realizing that animal products are terrible in pretty much every way possible. So yeah, but the more we can get this information out there, the more we can speed up that process. Yes.
Yeah, I have a granddaughter that's somewhat interested in this, and I was wondering, do you have a visual representation like you've shown here that is available that I could?
We have, if you stop by our table in the auditorium, we have our own brochures which have a little infographic that sums up the 4 different, animals, environment, public health,
Is
social
it
justice.
visual, though?
It is visual, yeah. It's a
Yeah.
little, so you can stop by the table and grab that. Yes.
Is the same sort of information available online so we can forward it to friends and family and things like
It
that?
is, yes. There's a video of me giving the presentation on our website, so you
Yes,
can.
but I'm asking more specifically about the particular parts, as you say, that people are interested in all different issues. And so if you know somebody's particularly interested in social justice and you would like to make the argument, beat, then is it broken down in such a way that I can address more directly the issues that the people I know are interested in?
We don't have on our website right now, I mean, we have kind of a brief little overview of each section. We don't currently have like a text version or something for each of the sections of the presentation, but actually that's a really great idea, and that's something that we definitely look into doing. So, yeah. Also, if you want to write that down, I mean, I can certainly forward you some resources of other groups that deal more with these issues that you might be able to send out. Yeah, sure, yes.
You know what I do? I notice is that some people in a family, there's the meat eaters and there's the vegetarians. So maybe if you do have meat eaters in your family, maybe to buy, local, from local farms that the animals are treated humanely and they don't use any antibiotics, and buy like a quarter of a side of beef and then use that would be an alternative, to.
Well, Hope Bohanec just spoke about this. She has an entire book on why the idea of local humane meat is basically a myth. It's certainly better than factory farming, and people who are buying humane meat are certainly taking a step in the right direction. I mean, they're saying that, they want to boycott factory farms. But, I mean, from social justice, environmental, animal standpoint, really the best thing we can do is adopt a plant-based diet. And so I think it's more effective to cook awesome vegan meals and serve those to your family. You don't even have to say that they're vegan, but just, they've done studies, and people, if you don't mention that there's less meat or no meat, they don't even notice. I mean, just make something delicious and give it to them. They're not going to care if it's vegetarian or vegan. If you don't, some people's family members, if you say it's vegan, they won't even touch it. But if you don't mention it, maybe then you can slip it in after they've already eaten some. Yeah.
I think that,
Yeah.
adding to what you say to this question, the main thing here that we have to remember for those who love animals is that it doesn't matter how you raise the animal. The end product is what matters, which is that whether the animal suffer living his life in cage will end by giving his life. The same thing will happen to the one that is in a nice environment, living like they love me, they care for me, they really care for me. And then at the end, he's gonna or she's gonna be killed so the person can eat. It doesn't matter whether it's humane living or whatever, the end products, both of them are gonna be killed. And they are gonna suffer, they're gonna feel pain, so somebody can eat them.
Yeah.
That's the main point.
Yeah.
So but we have to start somewhere.
Right.
Not to discourage those who do that. We have to start somewhere. When somebody comes from eating animals that are in cages and whatever, and change to that point, it's working toward the goal to become vegan,
Right.
which is a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Yes, you had a question?
Yeah, my question was kind of related to, mine was more of like a social media sharing. People live on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I just really like, some of the slides that you had were just really great. I was just like, I'm wanting to run up to the and put on Facebook, because there's so many, because there, a lot, and most of my friends, I would say, I only have a couple friends who are vegan, and most people really don't know this stuff. And it would just, I think it helps I'm becoming less shy I'm putting stuff on Facebook and I'm like, oh, the heck with it, who cares if everyone
Yeah.
knows it? You know, it's like,
That's a great idea. I mean, social media is a very potent way to get this information across, especially in like fun infographics rather than really gory, judgmental stuff that tends to get people to just block you from their feed. But yeah, we're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Actually, that's another great idea. A lot of our slides we don't have up shareable, but some of you may have seen, for the second year in a row now, we've won advertisements on BART. So our organization has, in stations and on BART cars, information about factory farming. Last year we drew attention to pigs and to the environmental impacts, and this year we're drawing attention to chickens and the health impacts. So on our website we have a media section, and it has our presentation as well as those infographics that we put up on BART, and those are shareable. You can just click to share them. But that's a great idea. We will add our slides up there as well. Yeah. And on our website, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are all FFA Coalition. So.
Is there like any material difference between like drinking milk from Horizon or some other organic company as opposed to just having it where it's being created at a factory farm?
No, Horizon is a factory farm.
It is a factory farm.
Yeah,
Okay,
Clover is a factory farm
organic
too.
milk, like produced by a local farm. Is it also
Local
like
farms also not a thing. Like Berkeley farms, which a lot of people think. Yeah, this is a favorite one of mine to debunk because I live in Berkeley. Berkeley Farms is a subsidiary of Dean, which is the largest dairy corporation in the country. A friend of mine went. They're all factory farms. So Strauss is the one that is not. It's less factory farm-like. But with dairy in particular, there is no such thing as cruelty-free dairy. I actually got a chance to talk with a Strauss representative, and I asked them 2 questions. At what age do you separate the calves from the mothers? And she said a day or 2 old. And I asked what they do with the male calves and the spent dairy cows, and she said that they auction them off. So they take no responsibility for whether or not they become veal. So those practices are endemic to the dairy industry. I mean, unless you have a friend who has a cow, anytime you're seeing dairy sold, in order to be price competitive, they're going to be using these practices. And also still just in terms of the manure, the environmental impacts, plant-based milks are really much better. Yes.
In addition, because those dairy cows that are organic, they're not permitted antibiotics. They don't give them antibiotics, which means they still get mastitis, just like any other overproducing dairy cow. They manually corkscrew to release the milk.
Yeah.
So you're still getting your nice dosage of blood and pus
Yeah.
and all that. And the poor cow. I mean, how painful must that be?
Yeah.
So, but what I had my hand up earlier for was as vegan community, something that I became more aware. It's a slow roll that just happens. Is the palm oil issue now, as far as clearing acres and acres and acres of rainforest and orangutan habitat at this point. 50,000 orangutans have been sacrificed in 20 years, and their entire habitat is at risk of being destroyed within 3 to 12 years from this point forward. That's not okay. And I was thinking, okay, already vegan, how many more issues do we need to push? Do we really need to give up our earth balance? Do we really need to give up the vegan cream cheese and the Crisco and all of those types of things that we're used to in our baked goods? And our family came to the conclusion, yeah, we do, because it's too big of an issue, and until this knowledge gets out, we're just as much a part of that as anybody else.
Right. That's an extremely important issue, one that we thought about adding to the presentation. And again, to kind of broaden our scope, it's not just an animal issue. There are indigenous communities who are being forced at gunpoint out of their homes that they lived in for up to thousands of years because they're cutting down their rainforest. And also it's an environmental issue because, again, anytime you have deforestation, that's contributing to climate change and destroying all of this habitat. So it's an enormously important issue. The Rainforest Action Network has a really great informational page on palm oil and also campaigns to get a lot of companies palm oil from their products. So, I mean, while boycotting palm oil is an important step, it's also really great to link into one of these organizations that's focusing on that and actually start urging these companies to drop palm oil from their products. So, all right, I guess I'll take that as a sign that we're out of time. Thank you so much. If you didn't get a chance to sign up for our email sheet, we do have a table inside the auditorium. I can hang out right outside too, but we also have more sign-up sheets at the table. So thanks so much.
Good job.
Okay.